to Concussion Podcast. This episode 114, and I'll be talking to Katie Mitchell. But before I talk to Katie, who I just found out whose full name is, I will not tell everybody your full name. Before I talk, I'd like to thank my sponsor, HeadCheck Health. Concussion Talk Podcast is presented by HeadCheck Health. HeadCheck Health bridges the gaps in concussion care through simple, powerful technology. Join organizations like the Canadian Football League, Track Factory Racing, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Eastern Washington University, and Volleyball Canada, who rely on HeadCheck Health to improve communication and optimize care. Visit headcheckhealth.com for more. And I would also like to thank Podpage, who had helped me, and John Devereaux at Perfect Day here in St. John's, Newfoundland, for helping me set up my new website. So please check out my newly designed website at concussiontalk.com. And of course, follow me on social media at Concussion Talk. On Patreon, patreon.com/concussion talk. YouTube is some crazy, I don't know, it's like GAWZ4s, who knows? It's some crazy thing. So yeah, so follow me there and subscribe, rate, and review a lot. But the new website should be good for guiding you wherever. So concussiontalk.com. And now, after my big long spiel, Katie, it's been forever since we've actually talked. It feels like we figured about like 2020, probably.
Yeah, it had to have been late 2020 or maybe early 2021. It's kind of that whole. I feel like the last year sort of just evaporated on me. So
yeah,
it's gone way faster than I expected.
You were in the midst. You were my last talk number. You were. Just not ending your PhD because your PhD was still is ongoing, but you were like having to take a break from it because the shutdowns and all that stuff and all that fun stuff. So if you want to just remind everybody what your PhD is and just how it's going now, what all these shutdowns and stuff and where you are with it, if you as far as you can tell.
Yeah, so most of 2020 and even a little bit of 2021, obviously in Ontario, we had lockdowns and things were just not totally open to the public yet. And so that was also including in-person research. And most of my PhD involves in-person assessments for our studies and projects. So that obviously had a bit of a wrench thrown in it. And so, there was probably about a year there where I was off, and then that allowed me to kind of build up my business and my clinical practice, which was a good time to develop those platforms and the space and everything. And so I was really fortunate to have that to fill the gap. And so I wasn't just left kind of not being able to do anything. So of course I get some free time and I end up starting, a whole business. But fortunately we have been able to restart. And honestly, that time gave us a nice reflection period based on what we started kind of my last couple projects with. We sort of switched gears in 2019 from some of my previous projects and started assessing more in the realm of optometry and vision science, partnering with the University of Waterloo and with Dr. Christine Dalton joining my PhD committee. And so that was really sort of a turning point for me. And we started those projects late 2019 up until 2020. Assessing dynamic visual acuity in athletes and non-athletes, and also factoring in things like concussion into that as well. And we were kind of manipulating things like posture and movement and looking at kind of dual tasking with that. And so some of the earlier stuff we have presented at like ACSM, for example, we did this conference is still ran virtually. So we were still able to share some of that. So it was interesting to kind of get some of those projects sort of somewhat out in the world, although they weren't entirely finished because we still had to finish the data, like the data collection, because it wasn't quite big enough yet. And so we were able to revisit that in 2021 And I basically was just inactive for the year of 2020 from March to December, and then returned
inactive
to
as you ever are.
Yeah, so it's just basically like kind of like withdrawing your status, and then you just come like a sabbatical, and then you come back. I only last like bit of my PhD was data collection and writing, and I can't really write until I have the data. So there wasn't much for me to do in that time that I couldn't just do on the side. And so I wasn't actively in my doctorate at the time. So returning to that in 2021, it was obviously very busy because now I had this new business and then also this PhD, which both those things take up a lot of my time. So it has been, like I said, it was a long but also really short year because it was just very busy building out a new practice and an education platform and such as well. So we were able to kind of get those projects rolling, and I think we closed the book on our first one, and then we're finishing the last project as well. And so I think I'm about 3/4 of the way done that sample. So hopefully finishing that up, but also again, recent lockdowns kind of affected my ability to recruit athletes. So that's also been another barrier as we kind of had these rolling lockdowns, but seemingly towards the spring, we're not going to have those types of things happening anymore as much, like hopefully. So we're able to still really follow all the guidelines and sort of precautions and safely conduct our research. So that's been really helpful.
Yeah. So I have a whole bunch of questions. We didn't really plan for much in this, for any question of this podcast, or I didn't, and I don't think India did. And but now I have these. First of all, I want to know about dual tracking because I got a tweet about that today, but also dual tasking, say. But also, so what like your PhD you're studying because we first talked about concussion and vision, and also I am now doing vision therapy at the local
exciting
Optometry, and that's going well, and I'm using a lot of the Brock string, and which is I think is the guy over Brock named that string. What a rip off! But he just put a string, put some beats on a string, and said, "That's mine." All right. Anyway, that's just had the point. But more or less, what are you doing towards about concussion and eye? What's your PhD theme? I guess. Don't see.
Yeah. So essentially what you said there was like dual tasking is basically the ability to divide your attention amongst like dual V2 tasks. Whereas often, I think a lot of the time we see what people call dual tasking actually being more like a multitask where there's much more than just two things happening. But we're essentially looking at like more applicable ways to assess vision. Like, so typically in a vision assessment would be conducted in seated. But then you add standing, and that's now a dual task because now you're just the act of standing itself is another task. And there is some part of our attention that we actually do put into maintaining balance depending on the conditions.
Right. And so there's like concussed athletes and concussed people in general. Just that's it.
Yeah. So there is an element of, if you're standing and maybe you're standing on foam, for example, that's going to take up more attention than just standing on flat ground versus like standing on one foot. And so when we add in a secondary sort of vision challenging task, so for us, we're using a dynamic visual acuity software. And so basically that's the ability to resolve the critical details of a target that's in motion or there's presence of motion. So you could be moving as well. So if you imagine trying to read like a street sign while you're walking down the street, that's dynamic visual acuity. So anything where there's a presence of motion and you're trying to read something, if you're in a car or something and you're going by and you're trying to read signs. So that's basically what dynamic visual acuity is in its simplest definition. And so a lot of it is traditionally, you maybe have seen this evaluation or had it done, is we're like, a clinician, or perhaps maybe there's a metronome and you just do head rotations and you try to read an eye chart. Whereas like that's also stimulating a lot at the neck and also stimulating the vestibular ocular reflex just for gaze stability. But what happens when you're stationary and the target's moving around and you have to recognize the target? So that's kind of what we look at. It's like a video game eye exam. So it's not just an eye chart. It's like a software program. And that was developed by Dr. Christine Dalton at the University of Waterloo. And so we've been using that program that she's previously tested where she's compared like athletes, non-athletes, and video gamers to, assess them with the sort of video game eye exam.
Yeah.
And what they found in seated was that athletes were more superior at certain levels of speed. So at the faster speeds than video gamers and sort of our control, like untrained athletes.
Yeah.
And so this idea that perhaps athletes kind of have a superior level of like sort of that attentional capacity or processing to be able to attend to a task like that and perceive a moving target. We took that and we were like, okay, well, what happens when an athlete has a concussion?
Yeah.
And now we are factoring in like this injury that affects these perceptual visual processing pathways and also attention, cognition, bunch of different things. How does that then affect that ability? Is there a difference between athletes and athletes like with and without concussion? Is there a difference kind of just between the athletes and controls? But we were like, what are more applicable scenarios? And so that's like standing and walking and other things. So what happens when you are in motion, when you have to consider your own balance control versus just doing it seated, where you'd think maybe seated would be applicable to like a classroom or like an office. But an athlete is typically upright in motion. They have higher levels of like heart rate and exertion that could potentially impair some of those things. And so that's where we've kind of taken a direction with our research to just like sort of look at all those domains together and sort of collapse the silos together to look at integrated assessments so that it's not just like vision is tested over here, balance is tested here, and then we do a cognitive test separately. It's like if we can do kind of all of that with one assessment. And so that's kind of what we've been working on for the past couple of years.
Well, that's pretty intense. And you were saying like that you started, and I know from your Instagram and stuff that you have started a new clinic. So how does this apply? How did what you just? I don't want you to go for that again because that'd be long. But if those separate visuals still are balance things out, but how do they apply to say or both as they start up just your clinic and then how would those tasks apply to your clinic?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to bridge the gap between my research and my practice, and I was limited to that by just not being my own boss. Essentially, like I worked for amazing clinicians and employers, but it came down to kind of creating something that didn't exist. And so, well, what I've done with Thrive NeuroSport is create a space that's kind of this blend of like having sort of an assessment treatment room that is private, that I can control the variables like light and sound and all those extra sensory things. But then I've got, the bigger gym space accessible to me as well with the square footage to be able to move and run and cut and pivot and do things with an athlete to get them to return to sport competition level. And so the idea was to have sort of the resources on hand to, like I said, one, start from the very beginning when we need to control all those variables, and then sort of work towards adding in elements as we go and integrating those clinical domains and throwing in maybe a little bit of chaos in there too, to mimic what real life and real like sport competition scenarios are. And what I've always found is I've either had like not enough space to do that, or perhaps maybe it was like too quiet or too sensory controlled and you weren't able to really open up a bit. Or it was too open and things were just a little too much. You didn't have any control maybe over those other sensory variables. Maybe it was just too busy. Maybe it was just not, again, like the space wasn't available, the equipment wasn't available. So the other part of that is also having the objective equipment like a force platform and video oculography and other things that I can then get actual concrete assessments out of and provide reports and feedback and provide some kind of guidance that is objective. So like giving them a quantifiable measure of things. That's been a really big change for a lot of patients, of just validating some things that like maybe they just never been able to prove is a deficit, or it gives me something for them to take and give to an employer or a lawyer or whoever to be able to add to their case for why they need like time off, or for a litigation case for motor vehicle accident, for example. The other side of that too is we can objectively track recovery and then look at the results over time with laboratory grade equipment that can give us some answers and help us determine when things have improved. But I also don't want to do this entirely on my own. And I don't think I can cover kind of all the scopes of practice that need to be involved. So things like vision therapy and optometry is like another component that I'd really love to have in the practice. And we're working on integrating that with a local clinic as well, having an using our office as well and seeing our patients. And bringing in other staff and team members is kind of where I'm at now. Is it was kind of just me for a while doing all these things, building it all. And now it's like, okay, I need to go further, but I just don't have the capacity on my own. So and I've also had really, like I mentioned, Nexus Health and Training is the gym that I work cooperatively with as a partner locally. In Elmira is just north of Kitchener-Waterloo. But they've been really great to collaboratively work together with the athletes that they train and develop for skills for their hockey and ringette and other sports. That has been really great. And it's all been part of like the collaborative environment and the team that we've been able to come up with like athlete screening protocols. So instead of like a baseline assessment, we're now just incorporating that into like a sort of like the off-season pre-injury screening like assessment. It's not so much just even for just what typical concussion testing is. It's like we can pick up any kind of nuances with coordination and balance control and things that potentially could lead to an issue down the line, but or we can address things that are existing and help improve that for the upcoming season and various things. So lots of things we were working on developing and growing, and especially that objective side, we're really trying to acquire and prioritize equipment that we're investing in to provide like the best service.
You must have a lot of energy because you got to know you have like a million different hats. You have your PhD hat, your business owner hat, your physiotherapist hat.
I have a whole collection of hats.
And your athletic trainer hat, and your
it's still there.
And still very much part of this. So do you deal only with do you treat only concussion patients at your clinic, or do you treat anybody and say, oh yeah, I think your deficits are here and here and here, or do you just only accept, say, concussion patients or clients? Or
I accept, like, I do treat like orthopedic injuries as well. And usually they do have some kind of a neurological component to them when it comes to like coordination and control, like especially like lower extremities, sort of like hip, knee, like it's like an ACL repair. But you look at the patient's history and often not, they have had a concussion in the past. And when you start diving into even like vestibular assessments or eye movements and various things, you start to realize that they struggle with that a little bit. And perhaps they never even really had that dealt with. So I always consider even that history to be a factor. But I sometimes get even someone with, they've had a recent car accident and, maybe they had an ACL repair a year before. So that's still somewhat of a concern, or they have hip OA, but they, had an incident or a fall and they got a concussion.
What's hip OA?
Sorry, osteoarthritis, like say if they have an arthritic hip, but it's like a concern, and it may affect some of the things we do for concussion recovery, but I also address the entire body. Because I do believe there's like that connect between the brain and the body, and you kind of you can't tease them apart. So I often use like a lot of movement and a lot of exercise prescription. So it does come down to kind of regular strength conditioning principles at the end of the day, but considering sort of sensory variables like vision, vestibular, proprioception, kind of that whole body coordination and awareness.
Wow. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say really, because you have a lot of you're doing so many different things now, and not different things. This is all pretty much about concussion, vision, and of course, head and other hip away, hip osteoarthritis. I got that. Is there
OA is just the acronym for osteoarthritis. Sorry.
So you're, I guess we can just on that head towards the end of this podcast with the Paralympics, which I know you're not directly involved in necessarily, but you're involved with sledge hockey. You're an leg trainer. It focuses on sledge hockey a lot. So you're off to Quebec next week?
Yeah, I have to go to Montreal this week. Actually, I think I might have said next week, but I'm realizing like I still haven't totally have a grasp on the
you'll leave now.
Yeah, I gotta leave in the morning. No, it's Friday morning to Sunday, but we're playing like I work for the provincial like sledge team Ontario program as sort of I call it a sports therapist because I'm an athletic therapist and a physiotherapist. So I'm on the bench with that team, and I've done that since oh gosh, I've probably worked with para ice hockey since 2013. And so I've been the lead with Ontario for a couple of years now, maybe 4 years. And so I have athletes that are going to Beijing for the Paralympics, which is very exciting.
The window start.
The first week of March is when the Paralympics begin. I think it's
and so hockey's right away is the first like pretty well off the bat.
They should be competing through the week, so I'm assuming they'll be starting right away. I don't know the schedule for ice hockey yet. I haven't looked that far ahead.
Okay.
But I haven't there's athletes that have been hockey players and now they've transitioned to be dual sport athletes. One of them being Christina Picton is a Nordic skier now, so it's like cross country skiing in a sit ski, and she just qualified for the Paralympics. So that's been really cool to see her journey and transition. And a couple others will be playing hockey as well, which is great. I'm really excited to watch them compete. But this is a really nice segue, Nick, because a lot of my interest actually lies in concussion and parasport, and the lack of guidelines that are inclusive to para athletes, or the lack of assessment tools, and sort of the applicability of a lot of the assessments that are like recommended. I know the consensus is supposed to be happening later this year. I will be going hopefully to Amsterdam to present for the next consensus on concussion in sport, because we haven't had an update since 2016. So it's a little outdated with what those recommendations are based on how much research has been done. But there has been a call and sort of this new consensus of parasport being developed, which one of my committee members, Christine Dalton, is also on that consensus as one of the primary investigators. So, or co-investigators, I guess. So that's been really cool to see that develop, and a lot of Canadian influences on that consensus. But I'm hoping that kind of once I wrap up sort of the research I'm working on now, that the future will look at sort of looking at para athletes and various assessments that we can employ for them that can improve sort of decisions for return to sport. So I'm really interested to see how these Paralympics go with the injury surveillance, because only in the last couple of Paralympics have they actually really been really focusing on recording like the amount of injuries, especially concussions, and identifying sports that are higher risk. And so they're starting to put a lot more spotlight on that, which is really, really nice to see. It is a complicated, obviously there's more factors involved with the various abilities of different athletes. And I think that's one of the things that we need to investigate more is if an athlete is a wheelchair user versus if they say have a prosthetic limb, like how do you then assess things like balance control and coordination or various other things for like return to sport, depending on what their sport is. So I think there's some really cool opportunities for moving forward and creating more accessible, I guess, clinical assessments and pathways to just be more thorough and also like more objective with those populations too.
Right. And understand like the injury surveillance, I mean, that's obviously a good thing now with the today's Olympics. And so obviously you'd hope for the moving stricter, even higher surveillance, but of course they're mostly focused on COVID now, which is pretty sort of just part of it. But you're saying that the concussion consensus is going to be in Amsterdam this year, and
hopefully,
hopefully, exactly. I would love to. I was just talking to Melanie. I'm going to miss her last name, Veenhoven last week. She's in Dutch. She's lives in Amsterdam, and I was saying how I'd love to get over to Europe. So hope, and there's a chance or not a chance now. We got a lot of stuff to do. I'd love to go over there and just or just at least talk to people from the conference. And yeah, so it'd be great to have you or anybody there on the conference on the podcast. But yeah, and you've said so many good points about concussion and injury surveillance and parasport, and then that the need for concussion. Sorry, my getting all just drink a bunch of water. So
It's
all
okay.
got a bunch of liquid on. But yeah, I understand about the concussion surveillance in parasport and the need for that to be obviously it's very. You said it's very good. The brain is complicated. Concussions are complicated anyway, but with parasport with different abilities, it's hard to just measure just the physical, just the things you can see, because there's also what they can see. You can't see it, they can see. And you gotta get more in depth. You can see it that their eyes are blurry, then you can't see that, and then they can see it, and then so whereas you can see
Yeah.
with your vision things too. So
Yeah, based on the low vision athletes, especially skiers, Dr. Dalton she's done a ton of research with low vision skiers and classifying skiers. So like based on their vision assessments, they're classified versus typically a para athlete would be a physical assessment to be classified based on like strength testing and range of motion and other things and sensation, stuff like that. So it's interesting that just the typical protocol that we all follow right now was developed for the upright athlete and the athlete with no disabilities. And so that's where we run into gaps wherein I pull out an assessment, but it doesn't apply to an athlete I'm dealing with. It doesn't help me assess them is one of the concerns. And also some of them have been through traumas that have already maybe had a brain injury.
Yeah.
So some of the symptoms on a questionnaire may be something they experience. Maybe they are taking a medication that causes them to have migraines or fatigue or dizziness on a regular basis. So that's one of the things, like considering, how they even acquired a disability, or perhaps, like I said, just if it comes to more of a physical assessment, is it appropriate for, a wheelchair user, an amputee, or, another type of athlete, maybe that has other sensory processing deficits that it doesn't capture accurately, like their abilities and wouldn't necessarily pass a test, for example. So how do we dictate whether they have, recovered or how they're prepared for return to sport? So, like I said, that one paper and Dr. James Kissick is one of the authors on one of the main papers that sort of called out these gaps in the literature and the consensus saying, this doesn't apply. We definitely need to do, and part of it is surveillance to figure out kind of like where are concussions happening and how many are happening, and what is the frequency and prevalence, and looking at what are the prevention strategies, what are our management strategies, what are the best ways to help these athletes. So just from my experience, working in hockey is one of the higher risk sports. These athletes, there's full contact. I don't think a lot of people realize that para ice hockey is very, very, like even this weekend is going to be interesting in Quebec because we were huge rivals, Ontario and Quebec. So there's a lot of contact. They're also in like steel sleds. So they've also got that making contact with your body. There's also just the flexibility of the boards are made for, again, upright hockey. So usually the lower boards are the more rigid part, whereas the top is meant to flex for an upright player to hit the glass. So usually you don't get that absorption in the boards, you just hit a wall. And so that is another one of the reasons it's like high velocity, high contact. Same with like alpine skiing, and there's I think wheelchair rugby and basketball, a couple other sports are higher on that list. Just again from like the either contact or the speeds. Because like downhill skiing, like they just hit such high speeds that if they crash, then that just kind of deceleration can be really severe. So there's definitely a need for that to be investigated.
Your brain like never stops. So I mean, you're like I hope you don't drink a lot of coffee because
I probably have like adult ADHD that's just undiagnosed. So many of my colleagues would probably agree.
Stuff like it's amazing. But so I guess so you can expect to hopefully finish your PhD this, I don't know, I'm gonna say this year, but soon.
I'm
Probably.
hoping I'm hopeful that by the end of this year I will have defended. Obviously, like I'm actually at a part-time status now, just so I
Yeah.
can manage my business and continue growing that and have time to kind of
Yeah.
spread myself around a little bit. So I do a lot of things, but it is very, I prioritize and sort of have my time scheduled in a way that it's not like full time at everything. So when often you see people doing 100 things, there's a lot of part-time things. But I'm doing my best to get all that stuff done this year, and hopefully kind of by the end of the summer, I'm really hopeful that I'll be close to defending and obviously still attending conferences and things this year as
Yeah.
travel allows. So like I said, Amsterdam's kind of the big one,
Yeah.
being in October. If that conference does go ahead, I've been accepted for it. So that's just a matter of planning and hoping nothing impedes that. But
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? No.
yeah, so I'm excited for this year that, I've kind of felt like 2020, 21 has sort of been this grind, just like sort of at your house or in your office, and you have it like there hasn't been a lot of interaction in the world. And so I'm really excited to kind of get out and actually like see people versus seeing them virtually, and
Yeah.
meeting with colleagues and other stakeholders in this industry and stuff. So I think it's going to be really fun. I'm looking forward to it. So
You're saying this summer, so I think across my eye, the picture behind you, right behind the back
oh,
behind you. So where is that? Is that a picture or a painting? I can't even tell.
It's kind of just artwork, I think, but it's like somewhere in Alberta, probably like the
Okay.
Rockies.
Yeah, I can see. I guess I can see
It's
peaks
not
through
me
the
because it's
lake.
you.
No, well,
No,
okay, somebody else,
but it's
somebody
sort
else,
of like a
somebody else, a
mountain
dark
range,
figure.
and you
I
can see
can.
it.
Oh, wait, yeah, nice. Yeah, it's. I can see it.
We're
Yeah.
big paddlers in this household, so we do
Oh,
some
yeah.
camping trips and
Nice.
portaging and stuff like that. So yeah,
That's
there's a
awesome.
few.
That's
Most
great.
of our artwork is nature artwork.
Oh, why not? And so fun. So I mean, you had your own podcast on the Thrive NeuroSport podcast on
Yep.
here. So if you want to hear Katie talk about her work back in 2020, yes, was the last time we spoke in the podcast. But yeah, just she has the same amount of energy. She has not dropped a bit. If not, she's gained some energy. I don't know how. But anyway, so where can
It's
people find?
momentum, Nick. Once you get some momentum, it just doesn't stop.
So where can people find you? Say, okay, where can people find you first of all? Find your physical location for your clinic.
So Thrive NeuroSport is located in Elmira, Ontario. It's just almost like a suburb of Waterloo now, basically, but it's kind of central between Kitchener, Waterloo, and Guelph. So we're about 20 minutes from kind of everywhere.
Oh,
But I see patients as far as like London and Burlington and Hamilton, that kind of area. So kind of a good hour and a half radius, but I do offer telehealth as well. So I've had patients as far as Thunder Bay
yeah.
in my caseload as well.
Oh, yeah, because you do like hip, I guess. So it's all like in Ontario.
Yeah, like so they can submit under their benefits for telehealth. That's been introduced in 2020. So I've had lots of virtual patients
Nice.
from all over Ontario. So they just have to be Ontario residents.
Yeah.
That's the one caveat.
So for people who are not in Ontario, or if they are, but if they're just anywhere in the world, where can they find you online, or your papers say about your papers, or your Instagram and your Facebook, or all this stuff? Where can they find you? That's online. They can.
Everywhere. Yeah. So my website for Thrive Neurosport is just thriveneurosport.ca. On Instagram, I'm at Thrive Neurosport. I think I'm on Twitter as Katie Mitch _ATPT, which I share a lot more kind of research and papers on there just from the format of Twitter. But you can even look me up on as just Katie Mitchell on like Google Scholar if you want to find some of my publications.
Cool.
But hopefully I'll have some more. I haven't been able to publish in a little while just from the breaks and sort of the ups and downs of everything and trying to just finish projects, as we've had probably about 4 in the wings. So once those are done, I'll be probably publishing a bunch of things. But yeah, hopefully that we don't face any more of those restrictions and we can continue moving forward. But yeah, lots of places to find me. And I'm sure maybe you can even tag in my email here if you want on
Yeah. Well,
the
no, I
notes.
might share description, which will be on my new Hangout website, which we'll put out. Will be out next week. So we're recording this. We're recording this actually on Valentine's Day, which remind me about your post today about love and the brain and stuff. So I don't
I
know what you like
did.
about that, but
I did.
that's on your Instagram page. So you do a
Yes,
lot of
that's
stuff.
the Thrive NeuroSport
Yeah.
Instagram. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah, well, so everyone check that out, and it's been great catching up with Katie and Katie. When I end this now, I'll say if we were I'll end this, but I'll want to say right after we end the podcast. So for everyone else listening, this is it for you guys. I'm hanging up soon, or not, turn it off soon. But thank you, Katie. It's been great. It's been great, and yeah. So this hopefully will be out on next week, and then yeah. Hopefully, see you, talk to you again. And yeah, thanks everyone for
Thanks.
listening.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. The music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound, www.bensound.com.